There is a weight you carry every single day, and the heaviest part of it is not the sadness. It is the belief that this is simply who you are. When you understand depression at this level, you stop feeling like a victim of it, and you begin to see it differently, completely differently. Depression is not your personality. It is not who you are. It is a state, deeply held in a state, and states can change. Not because someone tells you to think positive, not because you force a smile, but because something shifts inside, at the root where identity lives, where your subconscious beliefs about yourself live. That is where we are going today. And before we go there, I want you to understand something important. You are not broken. You never were. What happened is that your subconscious mind learned something. It learned a version of you, a version that feels heavy, a version that feels stuck, a version that looks at life and feels nothing, or feels everything all at once with no way to carry it. And that version became familiar. Familiarity is powerful. The subconscious mind does not chase happiness. It chases what is familiar. It moves toward what it already knows, and if it has known pain long enough, it starts to call that pain home. That is not weakness. That is how the mind works. That is how all of us work. The mind learns patterns. It learns identities. It learns what to expect from life, and then it creates your experience to match those expectations. This is not philosophy. This is psychology. This is how the subconscious operates. And depression lives here, not just in chemicals, not just in genetics, but in the stories your subconscious has accepted about who you are, about what you deserve, about what life feels like for someone like you. Think about that for a moment. When you are in depression, you do not just feel sad. You feel like sadness is yours, like it belongs to you, like it is a part of your identity. You do not say, "I'm experiencing sadness right now." You say, "I am depressed." You attach it to your being, to your name, to yourself. That is an identity statement, and identity is the deepest layer of the subconscious mind, deeper than habits, deeper than beliefs, deeper than thoughts. When something becomes your identity, it starts shaping everything. Your thoughts filter through it. Your memories get colored by it. Your future gets decided by it. A person who has accepted depression as their identity will look at a good day and not trust it. They will feel happiness briefly and immediately wait for it to disappear. Because the identity underneath says, "This is not really who I am. My real self is the one who suffers." That is the invisible war happening inside you, not between you and depression, but between the version of you that is suffering and the version of you that was never broken to begin with. Both exist inside you right now at the same time. The depressed identity was learned. It was shaped by experiences, by losses, by moments where the world felt too heavy and too cold, by relationships that made you feel invisible, by failures that made you feel like you were not enough, by a slow and quiet accumulation of moments where your nervous system concluded, "This is what life is. This is what I am." And that conclusion went deep. It went beneath the surface. It went into the subconscious. And once something is in the subconscious, it begins to run automatically. You wake up heavy without knowing why. You feel empty without a clear reason. You look at your life and feel completely disconnected from it, not because you are choosing to feel this way, but because the program is running. And programs run on their own until something changes at the root, until a new identity begins to take hold. But here is what makes this so difficult to see. Depression does not feel like a program. It feels like truth. It feels like the clearest version of reality. When you are deep inside it, it feels like everyone else is pretending, and you are the only one seeing what is actually real. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it depressive realism. The idea that people in depression sometimes perceive certain things more accurately. But accurate perception of a painful reality is not the same as the full reality, because the full reality includes something depression hides from you. It hides the possibility of change. Not because change is impossible, but because the depressed identity cannot afford to believe in it. If it believed in change, It would have to loosen its grip. It would have to let go of the version of you it has built, and no identity does that easily, even a painful one, even one that is quietly destroying you from the inside, because it is still familiar, and the subconscious will protect what is familiar above almost everything else. This is why willpower alone does not reach it. This is why forcing positivity does not heal it. This is why most surface-level advice slides right off without making any real difference, because none of it speaks to the identity layer. None of it reaches the place where the subconscious has decided who you are and what your life is allowed to feel like. For something to actually shift, the self-concept has to change, the inner story has to change. And that is more possible than you have been told, not through struggle, not through fighting what you feel, but through understanding, through a quiet and honest look at what is actually happening inside you. The kind of look we are taking right now, because awareness is always the beginning. The moment you truly see the pattern, you're no longer completely trapped inside it. The moment you understand that depression is a state rooted in a learned identity and not a permanent truth about who you are, something begins to move, something small, something quiet, but something real, like the first crack of light in a room that has been dark for a very long time. You are in that room right now, and what you are beginning to understand is exactly how the light finds its way in. There is something nobody tells you about depression. It is not just a feeling, it is a filter, a lens that sits between you and everything you experience. And when that lens is in place, everything that comes in gets distorted. A kind word feels suspicious. A good moment feels temporary. A compliment feels like a mistake, because the filter is not neutral. It is looking for evidence. Evidence that confirms what the subconscious already believes. That you are not okay. That life is heavy. That things do not really get better for someone like you. This is called confirmation bias, and the subconscious mind runs on it constantly. It does not look for what is true. It looks for what matches the story it already holds. And when the story is depression, every experience gets bent to fit that story. You could have 10 good things happen in a day and one difficult thing, and your mind will hold on to the one difficult thing, not because you are weak, not because you are ungrateful, but because that difficult thing matches the internal story. It feels more real than the good things. It feels like proof of what the subconscious already decided long ago. This is why depressed people often cannot simply choose to feel better. The mind is not a mirror reflecting what is outside. It is a projector. It projects outward what it already carries inside. And when what it carries inside is a deeply rooted belief in suffering, that is what it finds everywhere it looks. In people, in relationships, in the future, in the face it sees in the mirror every morning. So the question is not, how do I force myself to feel happy? The question is, what is the story my subconscious is running? And where did that story come from? Because it came from somewhere. It always does. Depression does not appear from nothing. It is built, layer by layer, experience by experience. Sometimes it begins in childhood, in a home where love felt conditional, where you had to earn safety, where your emotions were too big for the space you were given. And so you learned to press them down. You learned to carry them silently. You learned that your inner world was not welcome. And that lesson went deep. The nervous system recorded it. The subconscious filed it away, and it began shaping your identity from the inside out. Sometimes it begins later, after a loss that was too sudden, after a relationship that left you empty, after a version of your life you believed in completely suddenly disappeared, and you were left standing in the ruins of it, not knowing who you were without it. Because sometimes depression is grief, not the grief that cries and moves through, but the grief that gets stuck. The grief that hardens into an identity, that whispers the best of life has already passed. There is nothing left that is truly mine, and sometimes it builds so slowly you cannot even point to a beginning. It just crept in, quietly, over years, until one day you looked at your life and felt like a stranger living in it. Like you were watching yourself from a distance, present in body, but absent somewhere deeper. That feeling has a name in psychology. It is called dissociation, a quiet disconnection from the self, and it is one of the most common hidden symptoms of depression. Not the tears, not the darkness people expect, but a flat grey distance from your own life, a numbness that is somehow more painful than pain, because at least pain tells you that you are still alive. Numbness just tells you nothing, and that nothing becomes the identity. I am someone who does not feel. I am someone who does not connect. I am someone for whom life has no color. Do you see what is happening? Every experience of depression becomes another brick in the wall of a false self, a self that was never truly you. A self that was constructed by pain and then confused for reality. The subconscious does not know the difference between something that happened to you and something that is you. It just records. It just stores. It just runs the program it was given. And then you live inside that program believing it is the truth about who you are. This is the psychology of depression that nobody explains clearly enough. It is not just a mood disorder. It is an identity disorder, a case of mistaken self, where the pain of your past got filed under the label of your name, where what happened to you became what you believed about yourself, and that belief began to live in your body, not just in your thoughts, in your posture, in your breathing, in the way you walk into a room, in the way you speak about your future, in the way you either reach for life or quietly pull back from it. The body holds the identity. The body expresses what the subconscious believes, and a body that has learned depression moves differently, breathes differently, rests differently, sees differently. This is why you can know intellectually that things could be better and still feel nothing shift, because the knowledge is in the conscious mind, but the identity is in the subconscious. And the subconscious does not respond to logic. It responds to feeling, to repetition, to deep and consistent inner experience. This is also why certain people seem to move through pain and come out changed on the other side. Not because their lives were easier, not because they had more willpower, but because something in their identity remained fluid. Something in them allowed a new story to take root, even while the old one was still present. They did not fight the depression. They did not suppress it. They began to relate to it differently. They began to see it as something that happened in them rather than something that was them. And that shift in perspective, as quiet and subtle as it sounds, is the beginning of everything. Because you cannot heal a self you are completely merged with. You cannot change an identity you cannot see. The first step is always separation, the ability to look at the pain and say, this is something I am experiencing. This is not something I am. That is not denial. That is not toxic positivity. That is psychological truth. You are the awareness behind the experience. You are the space in which depression moves. You are not the depression itself. And the moment that truth lands, not just as a thought but as something felt, something begins to loosen. The grip of the identity starts to ease. And in that space something new becomes possible. Not forced, not rushed, but real, quietly and deeply real. Because real change never announces itself loudly. It begins in silence, in understanding, in the slow and steady shift of what you believe about who you actually are. And you are just beginning to see it. You have carried this for a long time, and I want you to hear something, not as a comfort, not as a motivational line, but as a psychological truth. The fact that you are still here, still searching, still listening, means something in you has not given up. Something beneath the depression, beneath the weight, beneath the identity that pain built is still reaching, still moving towards something. That part of you is not small. That part of you is the most real thing about you. And it has been there the entire time, even on the days you could not feel it, even on the days the darkness felt total. It was there, quiet, waiting. That is not a poetic idea. That is the truth of how the subconscious works. Underneath every learned identity, the original self remains, untouched, unchanged, not broken by what happened to it. Because the subconscious can hold a false identity on the surface, while the deeper truth of you stays intact beneath it. Depression covered you. It did not replace you. There is a difference. And that difference is everything. Now here is what most people never reach. They spend their energy fighting the depression, arguing with the thoughts, trying to force different feelings, exhausting themselves in a war against their own inner world. And the war never ends, because what you fight, you feed. What you resist, you give your attention to. And attention is energy, and energy is what keeps a pattern alive. The subconscious does not distinguish between wanted and unwanted attention. It simply responds to what you focus on most consistently. So when you wake up every morning, and the first thing you do is check, am I still depressed? Am I still feeling heavy? Is it still there? You are feeding the identity. You are confirming it. You are telling the subconscious, this is still who we are. This is still what we are looking for. And the subconscious listens. It always listens. So the shift is not about fighting. It is about redirecting, not forcing joy, not pretending the pain is not real, but slowly, consistently, deliberately beginning to place your attention on a different version of yourself, a version that exists right now, not in the future, not after everything gets better. But right now, underneath the weight, there is a version of you that is whole. That has always been whole, and the work is learning to feel that version, even slightly, even for a moment, because the subconscious learns through feeling, not through thinking, not through understanding alone, through felt experience. When you begin to feel even briefly, even imperfectly, what it is like to be someone who is not defined by their pain, the subconscious begins to record something new, a new data point, a new possibility. And possibilities, when felt consistently, become beliefs, and beliefs, when held deeply enough, become identity. This is how the shift happens, not overnight, not dramatically, but layer by layer. The same way the depression was built, the new identity is built, experience by experience, feeling by feeling, moment by moment. And you do not have to have it all figured out. You do not have to feel completely different today. You just have to be willing to let a new version of yourself begin to exist inside you, even while the old one is still present. Both can exist at the same time, the old identity and the new one. For a while, they will, and that is okay. That is not failure. That is transition. Every identity shift goes through that middle space, where the old feels familiar and the new feels fragile. Where part of you wants to go back because back is known, and the unknown feels dangerous to a nervous system that has learned to survive through predictability. But here is what I want you to understand. The discomfort of change is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is moving, and movement is life. Stillness is what depression asks of you. Stay here. Do not reach, do not hope, do not try. But something in you keeps reaching. Something in you found this. Something in you is listening right now, because it knows, even if only quietly, that this is not the end of your story. Depression is a chapter, a very heavy, very real chapter, but it is not the whole book, and you are not the chapter. You are the one living through it. You are the awareness behind it, the self that watches, the self that feels, the self that, even in the darkest moments, is somehow still present. Still witnessing, still here. That self cannot be depressed. That self is the ground everything else happens on. And when you begin to identify with that self, when you begin to feel yourself as the awareness rather than the contents of the awareness, something fundamental changes. The depression does not disappear immediately, but your relationship to it changes. And a changed relationship changes everything, because you are no longer inside it looking out. You are outside it looking in. And from that position, you have something you did not have before. You have space, and in space there is choice, not forced choice, not willpower, but the natural movement of a self that is no longer completely merged with its pain, a self that can breathe, a self that can slowly and gently begin to choose differently. Begin to feel differently, begin to see itself differently. This is the psychology of transformation, not motivation, not discipline. Identity. Who you believe yourself to beat the deepest level of your subconscious mind. That is what shapes your life. That is what shapes your moods. That is what shapes what feels possible for you. And identity can change. It has always been able to change. The subconscious is not a locked room. It is a living system, one that responds to new and consistent inner experience, one that can learn a new story when that story is felt deeply enough and long enough. You have spent long enough in the old story, not because you chose it, not because you are weak, but because nobody showed you the door. This is the door. Understanding is the door. Seeing yourself clearly without judgment is the door. Knowing that what you have been living is a learned identity and not a life sentence, that is the door. And you are standing in it right now. You do not have to leap through it today. You do not have to have everything figured out. You just have to be willing to stay here, at this threshold, and let the understanding do what understanding does. Let it quietly rearrange something inside you. Let it soften what has been hard for too long. Let it remind you of what you have always been beneath everything that happened to you. Whole, aware, real, and more capable of change than depression ever wanted you to believe. This is not the end. This is the beginning of seeing yourself differently, and that quietly is everything.